What if I told you there exists a version of the Bible, Ethiopian, that contains books the rest of the world removed, texts about angels, forbidden knowledge, and ancient mysteries that most people have never even heard of? Some say these books were banned. Others believe they were hidden on purpose. But what is the truth? Was the Ethiopian Bible really banned? Or is the story something far more complex? So welcome to MystoReveal, where we uncover the truth behind the world's biggest mysteries. In this video, we'll explore why the Ethiopian Bible is different, why its books were excluded from other versions, and whether it was truly banned or simply misunderstood. The Ethiopian Bible is one of the oldest and most complete versions of the Bible in existence. While most modern Bibles contain 66 books, the Ethiopian Bible contains around 81. It belongs to the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, a Christian tradition that dates back to the 4th century. Unlike other regions, Ethiopia remained relatively isolated. Because of this, its religious texts developed differently, and many ancient writings were preserved instead of removed. It's important to clarify that the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church has a complete and revered canon of Scripture, including books that are not found in the Bibles of many other Christian traditions. These additional books, often referred to as apocrypha or deuterocanonical texts, have been part of their tradition for centuries. The idea of the Ethiopian Bible being banned often stems from historical periods where certain texts were either not widely circulated or were questioned by other Christian denominations during their own canon formation processes. For instance, during the Protestant Reformation, there was a significant movement to standardize biblical canons, and some texts that were accepted in older traditions were excluded from the Protestant Bible. This wasn't a ban on the Ethiopian Bible specifically, but rather a divergence in what was considered authoritative scripture by different branches of Christianity. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, however, has always maintained its unique and extensive canon. Their scriptures are deeply interwoven with their cultural and spiritual heritage, and they continue to be faithfully preserved and studied. The richness of their tradition offers a valuable perspective on the diverse ways faith has been expressed and understood throughout history. To understand why people say it was banned, we need to go back in time. In early Christianity, there was no single Bible. Different communities followed different texts. Some books were accepted, others were debated, and some were eventually excluded. Over time, church leaders created a standard version. This process is called canon formation. Books that were not included were not necessarily banned. They were simply left out. But to the modern world, this looks like removal, and that's where the idea of banning began. One of the biggest reasons for this controversy is the extra books found in the Ethiopian Bible. The most famous is the Book of Enoch. This text describes visions of heaven, powerful angels, and events that are not explained in other scriptures. In early times, it was widely known, but later, it was removed from most versions of the Bible, not because it was dangerous to outwares, but because it did not align with the final canon. Another book, the Book of Jubilees, presents a detailed timeline of history and adds new interpretations. There are also texts like Maccabean, which are completely different from what most people expect. These differences made the Ethiopian Bible look unusual to the outside world. The simple answer is no. The Ethiopian Bible was never banned in Ethiopia. It has been used continuously for centuries. The confusion comes from comparison. When people see books missing from their version, they assume those books were removed or hidden. But in reality, different traditions made different choices. There was no global ban, only different paths. Ethiopia has some of the oldest surviving illustrated Bibles in the world, known as the Garima Gospels. Estimated to be around 1,500 plus years old, written on animal skin, parchment, still preserved in Monasati. The Ethiopian Bible is written in Ge'ez, an ancient language, no longer spoken in daily life, still used in religious rituals. Meanings are often more original compared to modern translations. Ethiopian tradition connects its history to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Their son equals Menelik I. believed to have brought sacred traditions to Ethiopia. Ethiopian tradition connects its history to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Their son equals Menelik I, believed to have brought sacred traditions to Ethiopia. One of the biggest mysteries, Ethiopia claims the Ark of the Covenant is kept in a church in Aksum. No one is allowed to see it. Only one guardian priest protects it. It's not just more books. The order and grouping of books is also different. Some books are combined differently, some texts are longer versions. Ethiopia didn't rely only on written texts. Oral storytelling was very strong, teachings passed down through generations. This is very important and underrated. Ethiopia was geographically isolated, not heavily influenced by Roman or European-controlled big myth-breaker. These texts were not secretly hidden. They were always openly used in Ethiopia. Modern researchers study Ethiopian texts to understand early Christianity, compare original beliefs, find lost interpretations, and Ethiopian manuscripts are famous for bold colors, unique art style, religious illustrations. There's something fascinating about the Ethiopian Bible that most people don't realize at all, and it completely changes how you look at religious history. It's not just about extra books or ancient language, it's about how an entire tradition evolved almost independently, like a parallel version of history running quietly alongside the one most of the world knows. Imagine this. While major parts of Christianity in Europe and the Middle East were debating, editing, and standardizing their scriptures through councils and political influence, Ethiopia was following its own path. It wasn't disconnected from the world, but it wasn't controlled by the same systems either. That meant something very rare happened. Instead of constantly revising and filtering religious texts, Ethiopia became more like a living museum of early beliefs, where older ideas weren't replaced as quickly. What makes this even more interesting is how the Ethiopian Bible feels less like a fixed book and more like a living tradition. In many places, the Bible is treated as a finalized product, complete, unchanging. But in Ethiopia, the relationship with Scripture has historically been more fluid. Texts were preserved, respected, and used, but not always locked into a rigid structure in the same way. That flexibility allowed certain writings to survive that might have disappeared elsewhere simply because they didn't fit into a standardized system. Another layer that most people overlook is how deeply the Ethiopian Bible is connected to everyday life, not just religion. In many traditions, scripture stays within churches or academic discussion. But in Ethiopia, religious texts have historically been part of culture, identity, and even national pride. That means preserving these texts wasn't just about belief, it was about protecting a piece of identity. When something becomes part of identity, it's much harder for it to be removed or forgotten. There's also something almost cinematic about how these texts were preserved. Think about ancient manuscripts written by hand, passed through generations, protected in monasteries often located in remote and difficult-to-reach places. Some of these locations weren't just isolated by distance, but by intention. Monasteries were built in mountains, on islands, or in areas that naturally kept outsiders away. This wasn't always about secrecy, it was about protection. But the result is the same. These texts survived in places where change happened very slowly. And then there's the psychological effect of difference. When people from outside Ethiopia first learned about this version of the Bible, the reaction wasn't curiosity, it was confusion. Anything that doesn't match what people already believe tends to feel suspicious or even threatening. Over time, that confusion turned into stories. Stories about hidden books, lost knowledge, forbidden texts. Even though the reality was much simpler, the perception became something much bigger. What's really interesting is how this perception still exists today. In the age of the internet, where information is more accessible than ever, the Ethiopian Bible still feels mysterious to many people. Not because it's actually hidden, but because it challenges what people think they already know. When something doesn't match the familiar version of a story, it creates a kind of mental tension. And that tension is exactly what drives curiosity. Another detail that adds to this mystery is how time behaves differently in traditions like this. In most modern systems, change happens quickly, new interpretations, new translations, constant updates. But in Ethiopia, change was slower, more deliberate. That means when you look at their texts, you're sometimes looking at ideas that stayed closer to their original form, not because they were preserved perfectly, but because they weren't constantly rewritten.
What if the truth we know today is only a small part of a much bigger story? The Ethiopian Bible remains one of the most mysterious and least understood religious texts in the world, filled with ancient scriptures, hidden histories, and beliefs that most people have never even heard about. Whether these forgotten books contain lost knowledge or simply another version of history, one thing is certain: there are still many secrets buried in the past waiting to be uncovered.